about this, and it's not a social history from the women. It's to hear their voices, and bear in mind that they're over 100 years old.
Well, in the history of audio recording, something that you'll be very familiar with, you don't hear female voices in the very beginning. It's a very, very small percentage of audio that we can replay, hard forms of audio, engraved in wax, eventually pressed, or on tape even.
How did they come about in the first place?
It happened right after the island unfortunately divided, but you had the Irish Free State, and there was great interest in elevating the Irish spoken language. Also, this is just repeating things everybody knows here, but for me it was a discovery how many people were lost who actually spoke the indigenous dialects of Ireland. And I found that enormously interesting just to start with. But also I just stumbled across a collection of audio that was made by a German linguist who was commissioned by, the Irish language? There was a committee that was set up to try and save the dying dialects of Ireland, or at least to collect samples of the so-called dying dialects of Ireland. So it was a German linguist and his engineer, Carl Temple, who came to Ireland in 1928. They had a session in 1930 and 1931. The engineer came on his own, and that was the first time we heard women in these recordings.
But recordings of any sort, it would be a big deal back then.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, if you consider that for 3 minutes of audio, you had about 1 kilo of wax on discs roughly the size of 2 dinner plates, stacked one on top of the other. So it was a very big production.
So was the recording equipment similar to like a record player?
It would look very similar, although much more crude. So instead of having an electronic microphone, they used a cone. Back in the old days, you had gramophones. And in fact, what I found very interesting was finding out if these cones were designed for the higher pitch of female voices at all. And it turned out no. This was, in fact, a cone that was used for a series of very interesting recordings that were made in prisoner of war camps on old German territory during the First World War, when the linguist who was commissioned eventually by the Irish Free State had been recording voices of prisoners of war who had been recruited by the British Empire, French Empire armies, and were on German soil. And that was a fantastic opportunity for them to collect samples of over 80 different languages. So I guess that's what brought his attention.
So he took the cone with him to record the voices then here and there.
It was astonishing how much effort went into getting exactly that cone here to Ireland, which means to me that this cone was set up mainly to accommodate tenor baritone voices, a voice like your own. And for my own voice, back in the day when I was working in radio, I had to learn to deepen my voice so anybody would take it seriously. So times have changed a bit, but I grew up at a time when you didn't even see women broadcasting the news. They just didn't exist. You couldn't hear them, you couldn't see them. So things have changed quite a bit.
Absolutely. The voices that we hear in this, is the language Irish or English?
100% Irish, different dialects. I think out of 137 people who were recorded, and they made often more than one little recording at a time. So you'd have 30-second samples, you'd have 120 seconds, you'd have, depending on how long.
Broken up by size.
It would be broken up according to what they were asked to say.
Okay.
So,
and what were they asked to say?
Well, they weren't asked anything about their deep knowledge of their home, their culture, their experience in life. The objective in this case was not to collect oral history, but it was simply to try and find samples so they could compare dialects, how people spoke, the choice of words, pronunciations. And so what was wonderful for us and for the scholars who became interested in this later on, these women and men were interviewed and they were asked, where did they grow up? Where did they move to? How many children did they have? What were their occupations? So the women actually have occupations listed. So not just a wife, but rather a farmer's wife or someone who's a fisherwoman or someone who might be teaching, which was rarer.
Okay. And It was mostly men that were involved in this initiative. There was 20 women, but of those 20, 5 were from Donegal.
Yes, 5 of them came from Donegal. I'd been calling it Donegal for ages, but I've been corrected. And at the risk of butchering the names, I won't say the names, but I can tell you where they're from.
Okay.
So we have places that I was actually able to see last November because I did a round through Donegal then. We have one lady from Ardra.
Mm-hmm.
One lady, a young girl actually, she's the youngest in the group, 16, from Duchary.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 17-year-old from Ranafast, and a 70-year-old from Fanad, and a 60-year-old from, I'm going to get it wrong, so I'll say the larger place nearby, Crawley.
Is right.
And I would say that the average age of the women who were recorded would have been in their 50s or 60s. They were picked up by, and I quote, motor car and brought to the locations where they could be recorded, where the equipment was set up. And in the case of Donegal, this was the old courthouse, which is what brought me to Letterkenny in the first place. And I thought, great building, I'd love to put this here, but the building isn't being used anymore. So I was sent off to Donegal County Museum, and I just walked in off the street and said, hey. And they have been tremendously open-minded about what I could do with them and very supportive, including the theatre and the cultural centre. We've been borrowing equipment and running back and forth up and down the hill.
Brilliant.
And it's just been a wonderful experience.
So what form does it take if I go along to have a listen? What how are the voices? How have you put the voices together?
Well, first of all, we've transformed a room into a place where you can sit on the floor. The lights are low. We have a few chairs. Everything is very comfortable and very quiet and rather dark. And so you have a chance to be with the voices in this composition that comes to you in various creative ways through 6 different speakers in the room. It's not a very loud environment, intentionally so, and I looked a very long time to find the right kind of speakers so you feel the voice is coming from literally almost a human being. And so it's a very intimate feeling space. And this is, my art.
Do we have pictures of the subjects, or is it just all?
I don't want you to have that. I would like to make these voices become part of your lived experience. And it's a way of taking female voices off the shelves, more or less, dusty shelves of very, very rather forgotten archive. And I must say, I would really like to thank the Royal Irish Academy for having gone to the trouble of digitizing these recordings. They worked very, very closely with Wilhelm Dögen and his engineer. They did the interpreting, they found the people, they set it all up so that it would be rather smooth sailing for the Germans who came and did the recordings. So if they hadn't digitized all of this over 12 years ago, 15 years actually now, I wouldn't have found any of this, and I wouldn't be sitting here in the studio with you.
And finally, what's the quality like? I mean, given the rudimentary methods to record back in the day, what's the quality like?
Well, I can mimic it. Would you like me to mimic it? It sounds a lot. I didn't do anything to clean it up because I value very much that sound. It sounds a lot like... That's how it sounds to me.
Okay, so...
But you do have snow. You have a lot of snow.
Or crackle,
yes.
as we'd know.
But I'd like to make a point for your listeners. I'm looking very much for people who are spoken word artists or who are very comfortable speaking in front of other people or would like to just have time for themselves and record themselves on their own phones if they want, with this ambience that I've been building.
Okay. So it's available now to go along and have a listen to at the County Museum.
And to participate in. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
And after that then you're going on tour with it.
Well, I wish it sounds... Canadians were rather modest. If I were American, I would probably hype it up a little more. I've been very, very touched by things that people have told me while I've been here, and I'm incorporating that in the way the sound compositions, there are many, develop. So after here in January and February, I take it to Montreal, where I'm from, and we add on at that point additional older voices. So it grows like a snowball. And, in a very modest way or symbolic way, what I'm hoping to do is retell the history of recording with, at its core, 20 Irish voices that came from women who lived mostly on the land or in very small villages. And with that, we grow an alternative sound. These are sounds that are not really, they were not part of how women learned how to hear, or how you learned how to hear as a young kid. And I like very much the idea of having them without reference to male voices, lovely as your own voice is.
Thank you ever so much. Well, listen, it's the Irish Room installation, and it runs through until the 8th of December, and admission is free. It's important to stress that. And if you're bringing along a group, just contact the County Museum in advance, or for more information, contact the museum as well. The best of luck with it here and beyond. Joanne, appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.